Welcome, everyone. I know we've sort of been thinking about how we've all come into team coaching and, as I guess, beginner coach, if we want to think back and why we decided to go ahead and get some formal training, because I think in general in the industry, people are really wanting to work with groups and teams. And then you kind of step into that with the facilitator hat on. And then we come in and we start practicing and playing around with models and tools we've used in the past or that we've read and kind of adapting them and so on. Whereas where the industry's gone more recently is to have more of a considered framework and way of working with a team or a group. And so more people are getting educated around that and going out and getting, let's say, proper training, if we want to call it that. So I know all of you, as have I, gone through that journey, and I thought it might be interesting for people starting off to have a conversation around what does it mean, like looking back on your experience of as a team coach, what was your experience of going through the practitioner program, and what was kind of some of your core learning that you got, or what was the journey that you took from being pre-educated to educated? Like what was that first kind of stepping stone for you?
Did you want me to dive in first, Tammy?
Sure. Please, David.
Yeah, excellent. It's interesting because, as you said, we get through the program exposed to frameworks and approaches and sort of the structure of a team coaching conversation and all these things, which is really great. What was interesting for me is that the training was a real reminder of the experience of being a learner. And what I mean by that is that I always have had a very experiential style of facilitating and working with folks, role playing and all these great kind of things. And it wasn't until I went through the initial team coaching training, it was a stark reminder of how uncomfortable that can be.
Mhm.
And particularly in team coaching, where we sort of take that to a whole new level, where we're challenging people to think and look at things differently, it was a really good reminder and learning for me to be really aware of the learning container I create for the teams that I work with, if that makes sense.
Mm,
It's something that I
absolutely.
think about a lot about my first practitioner program and the learning and some of the challenges that I had going through. And I carry that and I think about it each time I go into working with a team. And what am I doing to set the stage so that they can get over that hump of this different style of learning, working together to really focus on the task at hand.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I love that because it's a real complex, adaptive way of thinking about the work as well, even though you haven't said that.
Mm, mm. So I guess for me, just building on what you said there, David, my curiosity was around, okay, well, how is team coaching different from facilitation? What makes it different? And I totally agree. There's an aspect of any kind of learning where you have to go through that unlearning phase, where you have preconceived ideas about things based on your training in the past. And so you need to come into the training, I think, with a beginner's mind, that curiosity, everything is new, and be willing to put aside those things that maybe you thought were going to serve you, but actually won't serve you. So for me, it was that getting really clear. And I think, Tammy, it was one of the practitioner practicum groups that you were leading at the time. There was just something that you said, and the penny dropped for me about the difference between the two. And it was that aha moment that you get, when you're a kid and you're really trying hard to learn something. And I learned to play piano and I practiced for hours and hours and hours and I just couldn't get it. And then literally one morning, I woke up, sat down at the piano, and then suddenly the notes just fell under my fingers. And it was that kind of moment for me. It's like, now I get it. So yeah, so that emergent process as well, you just got to trust that that's how the brain works. And yeah, so it was a brilliant moment because that then mirrors what happens in that team coaching container, as you call it, David.
Mm, I love that. And it's so great because, like, as faculty for the program, it's not like we are the experts by any stretch, right? I mean, we definitely bring expertise in our background and experience, but it's the learners who help us co-create that learning environment, and they also bring their experiences. And so it's like a harmony is what
Yeah.
came to my mind, Ro, when you
Yeah.
were
Brilliant. I love that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, nice. Michelle?
Jumping in on that, just, one of the things I find really important is the experiential piece. So we were brought into the learning, had the models, frameworks, and, did a lot of that head learning. But then when we went into the practicums and we had role play, and we were actually in the practice of being a team coach with a co-coach and with a scenario where we had to all of a sudden do it and
Mm,
realize where our biases might take us, what we tripped on, what worked, and benefit from the safe space of feedback from our cohort, our peers, and from instructors like you leading us, Tammy, and helping us to deepen and make that make sense in terms of what I might have done if I just read the book or listened to the webinar, but I'm in there with my hands in the muck and I'm really learning from what's happening. And those were some of the most impactful learnings. How do we enter into the team systems? How do we work with complex adaptive systems? And also that idea of it's complex adaptive system, but dropping a rock into the pond and the ripples that go out from it or come back in if the wind is blowing and so forth. So for me, it was that really rich experience that put me in front of some of the things I thought one would be doing, but actually only benefiting in community with each
mm.
other as learners and with yourself as instructor and the other faculty. So
Yeah, yeah, nice. And great point too, because how often is it, I mean, even in individual coaching, right, that we get to see each other coach,
Mm.
right? And so here you kind of get to see some best practices or some learnings that everybody shares in. And I think that that's the thing that I find really rewarding as a faculty member myself is that you're always a learner and you're also trying to share and teach. I think that when you see practitioner or what have you, that many people think, oh, I already know how to do that.
Mm.
Whereas I would say universally, we get feedback all the time from graduates saying, wow, I had no idea that I've fallen into this habit or that I had a bias around X or that my preferences or I've fallen into the trap of doing workshops. Like most people think by doing a structured workshop and having a framework that's actually team coaching. Well, it might be if that's what the team needs, but you're more than on the facilitation side. And I think that that's what the beauty of practitioner is, that it kind of helps you through that journey of, oh yeah, I need to do a both and I need to be more client centered in how do I feel comfortable with that unknown of what's going to come up in the room, that I could put my entire run sheet to the side, or I could put my framework to the side and just listen and support the team. Or if I'm more emergent, how do I bring some structure in? So I guess as we've gotten more experienced, since graduating, or just along the entire trajectory, like what has become more of a need or what more apparent to how you practice the work?
I think for me, it sort of builds on actually what you just said, Tammy, about working with other coaches. And so this is sort of practitioner, senior practitioner, and beyond, is that as coaches, we spend a lot of time working on our own. So
Mhm.
team coaching and the training program challenges us to work with a co-coach. And for a lot of us, there's a lot of unlearning, as we talked about, that happens there. A lot of things that we maybe didn't see or notice about ourselves that come to light when we're working with a co-coach. So I think for me, that was probably, and you and I've talked about it, one of the bigger tensions and challenges that I had, but also such a great opportunity for learning. And what I find now as I'm doing more team coaching, getting out there, experiencing and learning new things constantly, I look for opportunities to work with a co-coach, and I look for opportunities to work with different types of coaches to really challenge me and make sure I'm staying out of my comfort zone. So I think that's something now that's becoming a need or a requirement, so to speak, is to experience different things, not kind of get into a common pattern, working with one coach all the time, because I think there's so much rich growth and learning that can happen in that.
So I totally agree with what you said there. And the thing that the reason I took senior practitioner was because I wanted to develop that sort of aspect of complex adaptive systems, how you work with teams, groups, you know, even in workshops. I mean, I've always had a bit of an emergent approach to my work. So anybody who's been in any of my workshops will know that. And it was kind of understanding why is that? Why is my bias towards that way of working? And so I wanted to understand how complex adaptive systems work when you're coaching them as a team. And for me, working on the key learning was that readiness piece for the team, that you as a coach might want to do something different with the team, but is the team ready for it? And being okay that whatever emerges out of that conversation, that's what the team needs and wants at that time. So it's about letting go of your own stuff. So it was kind of twofold, really. It was that complex adaptive systems piece, and it was also being really present with your own bias and how that affects the field, the coaching field that you're in, which I found really fascinating. And I've loved the experience of being part of faculty, just watching and observing other team coaches as they're going through their learning as well. Because of course, even though we're delivering the same materials, it's different every time because of the people in the room. So it was just that fascination with how complex adaptive systems work.
Mm.
And looking to really, for me, looking and learning to see and understand nuances. So what are the team's needs in relation to where they are in the organization, the sector, the time and history, and also then what's coming up for me, as you said, Ro, in terms of what are my biases and can I be courageous enough to see them? And so if I might be too emergent, maybe the team needs a little bit more structure depending on their background and how do I meet them there, and then begin to move forward in a way that will hopefully serve what they are bringing in as possibilities. So we have processes and structures and frameworks, but every time we enter into an engagement with a team, just as we do with learners in the learning environment, it's different. Something else does emerge. And how do we make sense of that together in a way that is forward moving, that is deepening the team's ability to handle the various realities that they have around them? So as a practitioner, what I do is important to, impact the team, and what the team does impacts me. So there's more of that reciprocity as you get more conversant with the work and have more comfort with, okay, this is what might need to happen. And the contracting is the other piece. And recontracting is really, really critical. And I think, your piece that you wrote about the importance of contracting has been a pivotal source of reference for me in living that with many people, and the importance of shared understanding and continually having to revisit that instead of, okay, this is what we decided. No, there's more here. We have to relook at this. We have to talk about it. And that makes that work so rich. And it's so applicable, I think, to so many of our team coaching conversations and work.
Yeah, thank you. David, were you going to pop in there?
Oh, I was just going to build on the piece about contracting that Michelle shared. That's one piece so impactful for me, but I have to say also made me a better individual coach as well.
Yeah. In what way?
Just the quality of contracting and how I approach those conversations and revisiting. It's resulted in me doing that process better. And as a result, clients having better outcomes for themselves. And I know I've said this before to you, Tammy, the most successful coaching engagements I had, individual or team, all came down to the contracting, and the least successful all came down.
Me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think lots of us could, I see head shaking. So
Oh,
definitely
yes.
it's that.
100% agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, without belaboring this, if anybody has anything else that they want to share with regard to building on what David said, maybe about like we hear this all the time from graduates, right? Like taking the team coaching program makes you a better coach because you're understanding the wider system that you're working in. And then the way in which you carry yourself, your presence, the Ro, what you mentioned before about creating that learning environment, and Michelle, what you said about the co-learning, and David on the contracting, like those are all elements, regardless of whether you're one-to-one or one-to-many, whether you're working with an agile team, whether you're working with a projects team, an executive team, a board team, whatever, a team going through mergers and acquisitions, or people just going through a difficult time and just looking at, say, how are they relating to their stakeholders? How are they relating to their manager? How are they relating to the wider system? What are they contributing to? What's contributing to them? So, lots of graduates even will really echo what David says, but I'm just curious about for each one of you, like, is there anything that has made you a better practitioner, or where are you going next with your learning? How are you seeing that with your teams and groups?
I'm going to jump in here because something you said there really triggered a conversation I was having last night with some other team coaches, and that is this element of teaming. So I think it's not just about coaching the team, it's about creating capability so that that team can create other teams. Because as I think COVID probably highlighted this, but we were already going down this route anyway, that we need to get better in organizations at creating effective teams very quickly, because the pace of change is increasing with technology. We have to keep up with the pace of change, and that ability to work well together and effectively together is something I, as a team coach, that's what I want to help people develop, so that they're able to team better with other people. And it's interesting, even in my personal life, I always watch how groups interact. I am a bit of a geek, I own that. And I just look at the interactions and think, well, that's not working, or that's working really well. And you can see in organizations, those teams that really get it and those teams that are just going through the motions. So for me, I'm on a mission, if you like, to create those teaming skills so that anybody can create a team. You don't need a team coach there. It's kind of doing ourselves out of a job at the end of the day. But that's in all of my writing, that's what I talk about: getting yourself out of the room and allowing the team to develop their own skills and capabilities so that they can carry on doing it when you're not there.
Mm, mm, yeah. And I think that's, I guess, from a learning perspective as a student in the program, what came up for me as you were talking, Ro, is that we're actually really trying to mirror that in the program, is that our courses are quite small. Like, I don't think I've ever taught a program that's more than 18 people, And so we usually have quite small cohorts. So you get to talk to all of us as faculty. You get to bring your case forward. We're trying to create that team coaching environment so that we're role modeling as co-coaches, and that as a learner, that you can kind of step into that and go, like, I'm stuck, I don't know what I'm doing, or guess what, this is great, can I try this out? Or especially in senior practitioner where we've got more bandwidth, but even in practitioner, we've got time to ask questions and you get to know other people, etc. And then how do we then take that back out into our organizations and, continue to stay with that community, and, or if we need a co-coach, whatever, bring that in, because that's another element that I hadn't even thought about that's, I think, unique and rich for students as they're learning.
Mm-hmm. And just building on that, Tammy, that willingness to ask for help when you're stuck and that willingness to offer help is part of those teaming skills. And it's, for me,
Yeah.
I can't speak for anybody else in faculty, but for me, that is one of the crucial learning elements of the program, that it's that willingness to step into the theatre and play the part so that you then enrich your own skills and help others enrich theirs as well. So you've got to be willing to step into that vulnerability space. And I think that's true regardless of whether it's training, whether it's work, or whatever it is. So I really like what you say there. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think also partnering with teams and team members within complexity.
Mm.
because the world is just changing, we know, and it's quite rapid these days. And how do we understand that? You know, with complex adaptive systems and complexity, how does that affect decisions? You know, I think
Mm.
we
Mm.
went into that quite deeply in our senior practitioner course, and the ethics that come from our work, both together as co-coaches in an organization, and how do we impact them, which also then brings up that idea of multi-level contracting. We're not just contracting with a team, essentially. We may be contracting with their executive team, and sometimes also their direct reports. So, you know, looking at the different facets of what is involved in engaging in that complexity ourselves, and then helping the teams to do work that is more complex, because oftentimes, you know, we have these biases towards very simple or complicated settings, and when it gets to complex, we get a little bit confused, pejoratively, you know, in the world. It's difficult.
Mm.
And so, you know, I think that those ways of dealing with complexity and then getting concrete, you know, how do we get more precise in our decision making? If what do we need to have that happen in a way that will help us move forward, so that it's not just up here and very, you know, esoteric, but okay, now let's feel,
Mm.
how can we get less sloppy with our decision making, for example, if that's a place that we're having issues in our meetings, and what does that mean for project ABC or whatever. So those are just a few things
Mm.
that I think are really standing out for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that, David, I'm sure you want to jump in here as well before we wrap this conversation up. But, you know, one of the things that I hadn't thought about that's dawning on me as we're talking is I talk about this as a teacher, I guess, so to speak, in the program. But, you know, there's this overlap in coaching modalities that I think that is quite interesting, in the sense that I personally have been coaching for about 25 years now. Like, if I think back to individual coaching when I first started practicing, we had that overlap between coaching and counseling, and
Mhm.
how you could not go into counseling. Whereas, you know, even just recently with COVID, like lots of coaches I supervised were, you know, kind of playing more in that role, because that was who the person had as a
Mm.
foundational, you know, I'm stuck, I don't know where to go, but their support in that particular system. And today in team coaching, we've got that overlap with consulting. And I think even for me, you know, like, I didn't come into the work as a consultant. I don't think many of us coaches have. And I know, David, you've got a little bit of that background, et cetera. But, you know, that's one of the things that we also try and support people around through the program, because many of us are not skilled at how do you do a complex engagement? How do you write a proposal that has more of a, even if you go to a daily rate, is a big stretch for some coaches. They're so ingrained in doing an hourly sort of a rate, to where actually where the industry is in that complexity of needing to have maybe multiple coaches. How do you position with a co-coach and a pricing perspective? How do you actually contract and work with the client from a delivery perspective, from a sheer, you know, logistics? How are we bringing this
Mm.
together? What does the design look like? How do you then sell that? Like, that's complex stuff for most of us who are coming into the work as individual coaches. And, you know, we spend quite a considerate amount of time having these conversations. And I know the learning groups outside of the conversation also have that. But it's a bit of both and, because, you know, we need that care still, which is kind of what you're talking about a bit there, Michelle, which I love. And the holism of what we're talking about in the program, because you're impacting on an entire organization, even if you're only doing individual coaching. And how do we then package that in a way that makes sense for the client? Because we short ourselves financially in the work. And so how do we make sure that the client is benefiting, but we are as well?
Yeah. Gosh, and what's really coming up as I hear both of you talk about that is that the minute we start working with a team, we're now part of the system,
Mhm.
and we're carrying with us these biases and logistics and all this stuff we're carrying around, and it gets complex and it can get messy. And we sometimes, as coaches, and I've done it myself, fall into the trap of really wanting to add value, and as a result, taking on too much responsibility in that system that we're a part of. So I think a big thing, as I'm hearing you talk, something that I've been aware of, noticed, and continue to always focus on when I'm working with a team and when I'm now part of that system, is how do I shift the responsibility where it belongs? Because that's really what
Mm,
team coaching is. Very different from consulting, where I come in as the expert, is more about them and the work they're doing. So I think
Mm.
that piece, when you talk about all these different things we're balancing, becomes something that's really important to me, is recognizing the role I play. I'm part of the system, but making sure that it's the team doing the work, and I'm there to create a space or a container for them to do the work, not do the work for them.
Yeah.
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 Which we all know as individual coaches, right? But
Mm.
then in a team environment, somehow that kind of reminder keeps coming up. Well, it's been a rich conversation. Thank you.